The Family Justice Institute is a program that the Family Just here at the Family Justice Center. We have been able to bring free and excellent workshops, and we give many thanks to our local experts. The Family Justice Center is a one-stop shop for IP victims and those experiencing interpersonal violence for them and their families. So we are so thankful that you guys are here today. Just a little bit of housekeeping as far as Zoom etiquette. Since we're all experts in our own rights, we just want to make sure we give that friendly reminder to keep ourselves muted. Also, please, whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling you want to share, please utilize the chat. My co-host, Nick, is going to be monitoring, so we can definitely let our host know, our speaker know when things have come up, so that way they can be addressed. We would like to know who's in the room, so if you're still continuing to come in, make sure you introduce yourself and where you're coming from, what agency, organization you're with in the chat. Last thing is that the evaluation at the end is so important. It really helps us make sure that we are bringing trainings that are going to help us all do better work. So please fill out the short evaluation survey that we will email you after this workshop. Please continue to give us your input so we can continue to improve here at FJI. Also, slides and other written materials in regards to this training will be emailed to all the attendees as well. And we'll also make the recording available. So now I think it is time for us all to learn together. So I am going to introduce Roxanne Bellotti. Did I say it right?
Yes.
Yes. Awesome. And she is joining us from We Care Services for Children. So I'm giving you the floor, ma'am. Thank you so much for being here, and take it away.
Thanks, Janice. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate that you took the time, and I'm looking forward to working with you on this topic of trauma and resilience. So let me see if I can. It says starting share screen will stop other participants' computer sound share. Say yes? Okay. So today's topic is trauma and resiliency. And what we'll be talking about today is the value of a secure attachment between a caregiver and child, do an overview of trauma, talk about the biology of stress, and how environmental and historical context impacts attachment, stress, and health, and what supports resiliency. But before we begin, this is a lot of challenging material, and some of it may be your lived experience. I thought it would be nice if we could just start with a little calming and centering practice, and this is from the work of Wendy Palmer. And so I invite you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable to do so, or if not, find a place to gaze that you enjoy. And as you settle in, take a breath. And just follow that breath down to the bottom of your feet. And then inhale and experience your breath coming up through your feet and torso, expanding to your heart. And exhale softly, relaxing your front, your arms, and your shoulders. And just follow the rhythm of your breath. You can flow along with its natural rhythm. And focus your attention now on the energy field around your body. What's the texture and quality of the energy at the back of your body? Is it different from your front, or is it the same? Now focus on your left side and then your right side. Does the energy feel the same or different? Continue to rotate your attention around your field. And now just feel the back and front, the left and the right, above and below. and sense that the energy around you is supportive and you can rest in it and it will hold you. Notice the pressure of gravity on your jaw, your shoulder, and your arms, and just allow them to soften. Allow gravity to support you just a little bit more. And ask yourself, what would it be like if there was a little bit more ease in your being right now? Just let yourself wonder and notice the sensations and the rhythm of your breath. Follow your breath, expanding and contracting in your torso with the inhalation and the exhalation. If thoughts or sensations arise, just notice them. All things in life arise, abide, and dissolve if you do not attach to them. Allow thoughts to be like clouds in the sky. You can notice them, but don't lose your awareness of the sky behind the clouds. The sky is clear, open, and vast. Allow your thoughts to be like clouds that arise, float through, and dissolve in the sky of your mind. Come back to the awareness of your breath. And just notice the sensations of the expansion and contraction of your body. Within your body and around you, there are more spaces than there is matter. And let your attention just move into those spaces. These spaces are filled with tiny vibrating particles. This is the life force energy that enlivens all things. Think about and see if you can feel this aliveness and vibration in your own body. And think about and see if you can feel the aliveness in the presence around you and in your energy field. And allow it to support you. Let's close by taking a deep breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and release this practice. Secure attachment relationships with caregivers are a protective factor for infants and preschoolers, setting the foundation for social competence and promoting effective functioning of the emotion regulation and stress response systems. So, what is a secure attachment? A secure attachment between a caregiver and a child is a relationship where there's confidence created that caregiver is going to be protective and they're going to enjoy you exploring and letting it be safe for you to explore. And it allows the child to attend to what they want, need, think, and feel without having to take care of the caregiver. The caregiver has the child's mind in mind and allows for a range of feelings so that the child feels understood. And when children are securely attached, they will trust the people they love. They will turn to their parents for help when they're in trouble. They will learn how to solve problems both with others and by themselves. And they'll trust that good things are going to come their way and know how to be kind to those around them. And they will be ready to learn. So this is the ideal of what we wish for, and that is all happening in relatedness between caregivers and children. And we are housed within bodies that allow for a lot of nonverbal communication. And the heart and nerves in the face and head are pathways through which we are each searching for and sending signals of welcome and warning through our emotional expressions, our social gaze, our tone of voice, and how we move our heads. Face-to-face communication in the first few months of life sets the trajectory patterns for relatedness over a lifetime. Infants can coordinate behaviors with a partner from birth. The interactions have reciprocity, and there's adjustments being made by both the parent and the infant, but the parent has a greater range, flexibility, and capacity. Infants predict things from patterns, so they can look at what you're doing and then they predict what's going to happen next. So if you start opening your mouth, they start to know, oh, that's going to be a smile if you tend to smile with them. So they're good at pattern making. So what I'd like to do now, if the tech will work, is I want to show you a baby interacting with first his mother and then his father. And I want you to think about before, when you're going through the process of looking, it'll be really quick. These clips are like 30 seconds. What you notice about the emotional expressions, the gaze, the tone of the voice, the head turn and tilt, and the sense of safety that this baby might feel with this caregiver. So I have to go to the marker to show it to you.
Yes, sweetie.
Can you hear?
Oh, that's not a happy sound. No. No. Oh, I know. Yeah, you're sad, huh? You've been sitting there too long. Yeah. Oh, you want out. So you want out. Huh? Yeah, you want out. I know.
Pause and talk about what you just saw.
So that clip is from Circle of Security, and I'm going to be talking more about that program today. It's designed for supporting parents and children to have a secure attachment. So what did you notice when you looked at this mom and baby, about her emotional expressions, how she gazed at the baby, her tone of voice, what she did with her head? What did you notice? Yes, mom was giving eye contact and she had a very soothing voice. And how important that is for increasing a sense of safety. Yes, her facial gestures, she looked like she had concern. And what do you think her baby was feeling in response to her? Would you say her baby had a sense of safety? Comforted, loved, understood? Yes. And how did they know? How did the baby know? It's her voice and how she maintained her physical proximity and her eyes. She kept eye contact. Yes. So all of these things were all what we do as humans to help another person feel safe and understood. And from infancy, we're doing it a lot because there isn't language yet. And it takes like 2 years before you have language. So there's quite a bit of importance to what's happening non-verbally for creating a relationship. So I'm going to bring us back. Now we're going to look at the dad. And again, I would like you to think about expressions, gaze, tone of voice, head tilt, and what the baby might feel in relationship to this dad.
And here's one more. Pause for a moment and talk about what you saw.
What'd you see? Do you think this baby feels safe with this dad? Yes, he's making similar sounds.
And
Yeah.
he smiled a little more.
Yes, yes, he smiled more. There was lots of mimicking. Yes. It was a lot of engagement with smiling and copying. It was like a call and response, which is showing you how there's no words yet, but there's quite a lot happening to build a relationship with the back and forth of our nonverbals. Father was acknowledging the baby. Yes. And he was so present, right? There wasn't like on his phone or something, like he was right there, connected, and also physically he wasn't like across the room, you know, like he was right there. They seemed to have a connection. Yes. So that is a baby that's securely attached. And so that baby's nervous system is going to be probably more easily regulated because they have this relationship with both caregivers that are being very attuned to him. But sometimes that's not the case, and infants are dependent. And so because they lessen or amplify feelings to keep their caregivers close. And that doesn't mean they don't have those needs though. And they have to kind of like not show them or miscue about them because the caregiver's not comfortable providing those needs. And so the child is left alone with that distress, and it's cumulative over time. It also impacts relatedness with others because the relationship with your primary caregivers becomes the lens through which you use your working model for how to be in relationship and what you expect and what you elicit from people. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the circle of security model. It's a simple way to understand the dynamics of parent-child relationships. It's a map for parents to understand and recognize children's emotional needs and how to meet them and figure out where their strengths and challenges are and how to be responsive. And even though this is set up as a map for parents, it's actually true in all relationships that what you would want to have security. You want someone to support you, support your feelings and support your development. So here's the map. And in circle of security, the parent has key jobs. On the top of this map, the parent is or caregiver is a secure base, and they're watching over the child and supporting the child to do exploration and development and enjoy. And on the bottom of the circle, they're a safe haven where they provide comfort, protection. They delight in the child even if they're upset, and they help organize feelings. And the hands are being bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. So ideally, if a caregiver is doing this about 70% of the time, they could be off. But if 30% of the time they're tuning and doing these different roles, the child will tend to be secure. And how they're doing that is that initially feelings are organized by your caregiver, and then they can be organized. They're organized along with the caregiver, and then you learn to organize them yourself. So it is a pattern of having co-regulation with a caregiver to get you to regulation. And your earliest experiences set a course for how you then are coping throughout. It depends on what happens that provides potentially more buffering. But if a parent's history involves not having their needs met, they may not accurately perceive and respond to the child's needs. And so this is important to think about in terms of how we develop our brains and our physiology and our capacity to relate. So if you look at this slide on the far left, here's a newborn synapse density. So these are the neurons in the brain. And as you move to the right, at 1 month, it's a little more, 9 months, it's a little more, 2 years, it's even more. And at adulthood, it's what it's going to look like. And if you compare 2 years and adulthood, you're going to see that they're very, very similar. And that's because there's rapid brain development that's happening in the first years of life. And so those neural nets that a child has include all their sensory experiences of being in a relationship. the sounds, the textures, smells, and how they feel with their caregiver and whether they experience a feeling of safety or not. And that has something to do with the caregiver's history and how they were raised and how their parents were raised, because they are conveying a relatedness style that either is supporting a sense of safety or not. And it's getting wired in. So we have a brain that has plasticity that can change over time, but that getting wired in the beginning kind of sets the tone. So our brains develop from bottom to top. And it's important to know that in this developing from bottom to top, the brainstem doesn't have a sense of time and there's no thinking. It's all acting. And it houses our stress response behaviors. So our fight, flight, freeze, our heart rate, our breathing, our appetite, our sleep-wake cycles, our attention, lots of things are housed there. And so there are core regulatory networks in the brain that come through the brainstem and go network throughout the entire brain. And our stress response is part of those core regulatory systems. And so it's very well mapped throughout the brain. So if you're having a lot of stress, it's going to affect how you develop. And the way it works is everything, no matter what your age, gets encoded from bottom to top as things co-occur. So if you are with a caregiver that is yelling a lot, then a yelling sound is going to be frightening to you, right? And then every time there's a louder sound that comes in as stimuli to you, you might feel more fearful because your brain matches loud sounds with maybe scary experiences more than a typical developing other person might have. The limbic system regulates our emotions, our bonding, and our sense of reward. And it's what's happening in our relatedness. It's kind of like how we're loved. And the prefrontal cortex is our thinking brain. And it takes longer to develop. It's kind of like how you are your boss of yourself. And that manages time and abstract thinking and values. So I want to go back to Circle of Security and the concept of shark music. So this is a concept that they created to say that to help parents identify the moments when they can't be with their kids' needs. And it's a painful state of mind that the caregiver experiences in response to a child having a need on the circle that's actually safe, but they don't feel safe providing that need because their own childhood experiences were ones where their caregiver didn't feel comfortable. And so they learned, in order to stay safe and stay connected to my caregiver, I can't really have this need. So now they have to parent, and that their child has the need. And so it's really unsettling to give it. So I'm going to show a video of shark music, their way of helping you understand what that would feel like, because it can be kind of sound abstract. And so I'm going to bring us to. All right. So what they will talk about is if you have shark music, you're going to have a stronger physiological response to upset, to something that is being asked of you versus not. So they're going to contrast for you how the exact same scene feels with different music. So here it goes. And we're going to talk about what that's like for you. Whoops, I'm sorry. Bring it back.
about this beach?
Okay.
This may be a place that you might walk on the beach and wade in the water. Now, let's watch a replay of the exact same beach with one simple change. Did you notice how the background music changed how you felt about this beach?
So what did you notice when you had the same beach and different music? What happened in your body? Wasn't as calm, became nervous, tension, made me anxious. So too much noise. Yes, you're expecting something bad to happen. And that right there, you're expecting something bad to happen, is the worry that a parent could feel in trying to meet the needs of their child because they grew up knowing that that need wasn't safe to have from their caregiver. So it's work to manage your physiology, even if you understand cognitively that it's safe. Because I find this happens a lot with parents with limit setting. And so they don't want to do it. They don't want to go near it. And so it's really human to be that dysregulated, because think about, by the time you're old enough to be a caregiver of a child, how many years of experience you've had based on having that initial wiring. And unless you've had some alternative experiences to shift it, that's your views, or that's the wiring that you have. So ideally, in a resilient nervous system, there'll be ebbs and flows. And with the ebbs and flows, it comes that there's a stressor, and then you come back to calm. If you've had a safe enough environment and a fairly responsive caregiving, not perfect, but fairly responsive. And it's important to say that the mother-infant relationship begins before we're born. Catherine Monk at Columbia University at the Perinatal Pathways Lab has done research studies to show that the fetus registers and is shaped by how a mom feels. So a mother's emotional experience is transmitted to the fetus. There's a gene in the placenta that is affected by an enzyme which determines how much cortisol is released. And the toxic stress turns off the gene, and the cortisol in utero increases, which then leads to the fetus experiencing a heart rate increase. At 4 months, the infant is more reactive than their peers. And at 6 to 7 years, the child has more challenges with attention, hyperactivity, and conduct. Cortisol is the body's stress hormone. When you feel very stressed, it's because there's cortisol in your bloodstream. And cortisol goes around switching on and off, and that changes your behavior and your sensations. And this means that external events in your life, which change the stress you're under, can actually change your genes and can switch them off and on. So our genes are at the mercy of our behavior, as well as our behavior is at the mercy of our genes. So Bruce Perry is a child trauma researcher, and to the question that was asked of him by Oprah Winfrey in their book, What Happened to You? Can a heightened sense of fear be inherited? He said that there's heritable genetics and heritable epigenetics. So heritable genetics is when genes transmit information to the next generation. Some parts of a stress response can be inherited so that a child is born with a more sensitized stress response, meaning that they react more quickly to some kind of sensory input, which makes them potentially not be more impulsive. Heritable epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of how behaviors and environment can adapt to activate or silence genes. Epi is Greek for above. So epigenetics are mechanisms above the gene that can turn genes off or on. Epigenetic changes influence those core regulatory networks in the brain that I talked about that go from bottom to top, and they can be stored in the egg or sperm and influence the next generation. So, trauma and resiliency was the title of today's talk. So, what are we defining as trauma? It's a nervous system response to a real or perceived threat to physical or emotional well-being. It's not defined by the event, but by the reaction of the body. There's a break or betrayal in the need for safety, belonging, or dignity. And the understanding of the self and others and the world changes. Our basic trust or sense of mattering is impacted. We are vulnerable and often more powerless. So we're learning by experience. So say you want to go for a hike in the woods, and it's a beautiful day like today, and you're walking along, enjoying life, and there's a snake. That would be probably kind of frightening, right? And then your heart rate's going up and you're not feeling so happy. So what is going on? There's an internal alarm system. The brain releases chemicals that help the body get ready to do fight, flight, or freeze. And if the threat goes away, everything goes back to normal in the body and we continue on. That is what a healthy stress response would have happen. But we do learn by experience. So the next time you're going to go on a hike, you might be a little bit more cautious because you had this thing happen with this snake. So then these things, these twigs and rocks are on the ground, but you swear it's a snake and you jump because you're more jumpy because you had a bad experience. That kind of primed your nervous system to be nervous. So a trauma trigger is a stimulus that returns the child to the trauma experience. It could be something internal, and this doesn't have to be a child, it can be anyone, such as a sensation reminder, where there's no intentional recall. You don't notice that you're recalling it, but all of a sudden you feel more agitated or upset. Or it can be external, like a location or a time of year. And the stress response turns on as the body's activating to keep us safe. And this can manifest in many ways that you see with trauma, flashbacks, nightmares, challenging behaviors. So if the threat continues or is repeated without co-regulation from a caregiver, the system stays on red alert, even when there is no threat. So then we don't have a nice ebb and flow to the arousal in our nervous system. We might get stuck in the high zone where we're edgy, irritable, having more fight, flight behaviors, panic, anger, or we have more freeze, more sadness, isolation, numbing, fatigue, or we're going up and down. So our nervous system is assessing danger and selecting a survival strategy that is based on the best choice at the time. And that's based on the options we have at our age and location, our cultural learning, our genetics, our epigenetics. And whatever survival strategy has worked best in the trauma is what our bodies will generalize to be prepared to survive. And I see this with kids that I've worked with who have very sensitized stress response systems. They sometimes have a tendency towards one or the other based on what happened to them and what they weren't able to do. And so then they are prone to want to do something that's more fight, to fight back or run away, depending on what happened to them. So we have an autonomic nervous system, and it's responsible for our bodily functions. So the things we discussed about the brainstem, all those things, digestion, heart rate, dilation, sexual arousal, how our hormones work, our metabolism, our sleep cycles, a fight, flight, freeze response, and a social engagement with others. So in the autonomic nervous system, we have both, we're speeding up and we're calming down. The parasympathetic helps us slow down, and the sympathetic system helps us speed up. So that's more the fight, flight, or the freeze. And earlier when we talked about how we engage with the baby, that social engagement nervous system is mammalian, and it's the most evolved part of our nervous system, and it allows us to connect with each other and to love and engage with our environment if we are feeling safe. And we need a caregiver to develop this system, and it's also the conditions that are needed for us to learn. We need to be, kind of calm enough level of arousal to learn. And all the nerves that impact this are in the top half of our body, our face, our throat, our voice box, lungs, heart. The fight flight part of the nervous system, which is the sympathetic part, is what does our escape routes, increasing in stress chemicals, our heart and breathing rate, blood goes to our extremities so we can get away. And our digestion slowed, because if you're trying to run away, you don't need to digest food, you need to be surviving. And it's also how you protect and defend. And the immobility nervous system is also parasympathetic. It's their dorsal. And it's what we do if we're in shock. Like if you had a severe accident and you're bleeding a lot, you need to slow down very quickly so that you don't lose a lot of blood. So your heart rate slows, your blood goes to the core instead of the extremities. There's low oxygen, low metabolism, and we're kind of in conservation mode. So these three branches of the nervous system work together to keep us safe and regulated and having a nice balance. We aren't built for constant survival. This is how it has evolved. But if we have a lot of constant stress or traumas, then things get stuck. So how are we determining if we're safe? The way we do that is through neuroception. It's the nervous system's capacity to evaluate risk without our awareness by reading cues of safety and danger. And that comes from inside the body, like if I'm feeling pain, or outside the environment, are there loud sounds, for example, or between people, like we were talking about earlier, like, do I feel safe in being engaged with you? What's the tone you're speaking to me in? What's your gestures? What's your proximity to me? And all of this is happening without conscious awareness. And this is different than perception, which is conscious. So sometimes when people have had traumatic experiences, they can have a faulty way of perceiving things, where the person can be safe with people and in their environment, but they feel unsafe because they have this sensitized stress response, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Or the person could be unsafe with people and their environment, but they feel safe because it's familiar. Even though it wasn't the best situation for them, it's familiar, so it feels normal. So I want to say that neuroplasticity is very important to think about in terms of resiliency, that our brains have the capacity and our nervous systems have the capacity to change. We can't get rid of the painful associations of the things that happen to us, but we can recognize patterns and make adjustments to build new patterns. And so the most powerful way to transform that is through belonging and relationships with people that support you and see the best in you and give you a space where there's safety enough for you to make change and stumble along as you do. So in terms of stress and the stress response, there's a range of stress. Stress gets a bad rap, but we need stress in order to be healthy. And the range of stress can go from positive to toxic. And positive stress is things that are predictable, that you have support and there is no real danger. So like if you are in a sports team or you're in a dance group and you have performances, it's stressful to be in public and to try your best to win an award or whatever, but it's time limited and you usually have some support. That's like an example of positive stress that's kind of developmentally normal. Tolerable stress are things that are more serious, like a car accident, for example, but you still may have, supportive relationships. And then toxic stress is different. Toxic stress is prolonged. So I mentioned before that the stress response system is networked through the entire brain and connects to the body. So it's taxing. It's taxing for the organs. So patterns of activation are what is going to determine if something is really a problematic stressor. So if you have things that are predictable and moderate, and a caregiver that's mostly predictable as well, you're going to be able to be more regulated in your nervous system. But if you have patterns of stress that are prolonged, extreme, unpredictable, you're going to have a more vulnerable nervous system because you have to keep your organs are being taxed a lot. And so what happens there? In a neurotypical person, if there's a stress response, as the degree of stress increases, there is proportionally an increase in the internal state of arousal. But if you don't have a neurotypical situation and you've had a lot of trauma, there's a sensitized stress response from the chaos, the threat, and unpredictability. And so something very basic and small can flip you into a state of terror very quickly. And then you're acting on that. So you may have more behavioral issues, more emotional issues, more health problems. We really aren't built to be in a constant state of survival. So adverse childhood experiences are potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood between 0 and 17 years. And they can be direct experiences like abuse, neglect, witnessing violence, or they can be environmental contexts. What's happening in the home with the caregivers? Is there substance use? Is there separation from divorce or death? Or is someone incarcerated? These are things that are potentially traumatic. So I was talking earlier about the strain on the nervous system. So allostatic load is a term that means the cumulative burden of chronic stress and life events that make it harder to function. Environmental challenges overwhelm our physiological system. So when I say that, I mean our immune system, our cardiovascular system, our organs, our metabolism. All of this is getting a lot more work. So what they found with the ACEs is that there was a dose-response relationship. And so I want to say a little bit more about how the ACE study even came to be. There was a doctor at Kaiser San Diego. His name was Vincent Bellotti, and he worked with an obesity clinic. And he found that some of the most successful people at losing weight would drop out of the program. And he wasn't sure about why was that happening. So he contacted them and he did a brief survey asking them about their childhood experiences. And he found that actually a lot of them had sex abuse histories. So he contacted the Center for Disease Control and suggested doing a larger scale study about health problems and early childhood trauma. And so they did agree to that. And so 17,000 people from Kaiser were polled about their those experiences, either abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction issues. And what they found was that there was definitely a trend of people having many ACEs. And this was like a population that was employed. They had health insurance. They were privileged as they were white people. And so it was notable. And what's really compelling is that the average age of the person participating in that study was about 56 or 57. So we were seeing them having health problems in their mid-50s that seemed to be correlated with having had abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction in their childhoods. And so they found that there was a correlation between the 9 major causes of death. There was an increased risk of suicide. There were mental health problems, substance use problems. But it's important to say that this was a correlation, but not a causation, because even if you have more ACEs, even if there's an increasing dose to your ACEs, like what's not said in the number of ACEs is kind of when did things happen? Because the timing, if it's earlier, it's more impactful to the nervous system. So when did things happen? What was the pattern and intensity of the things that happened? And did you have connectedness to buffer that adversity? And that's part of why you can't just go with what is an ACE number. And so we know that it creates that load to the system, but as I said, there's a lot of mitigating factors. And so these were the original ACEs, the abuse, neglect, and the home environment. And since then, the study's been replicated a bunch of times, and we know that there was lots of things that were left out. So some examples of things that were left out that are significant are racism, war or terrorism, and being impactful. It's not on here, but being in foster care, natural or man-made disasters, witnessing violence, sexual exploitation, medical trauma. There's a lot of things that can be making a person very stressed. So I just wanted to touch on racism because it's so pervasive and it's impacting everyone and the nervous systems of people of color. And so macro level systems continually set up conditions that deny groups access to safety, food, resources, education, mobility, belonging, and a sense of worthiness. And histories are often denied. I mean, the creation of the United States as we know it was colonization, genocide, removing people from their property, slavery, forced family separations. These were things that impacted people for hundreds of years. There's been no apologies or restitution for harm done. And there's a retention of power within a structural racism frame for people who were harmed. So structural racism is increasing allostatic load. So I just want to remind you what allostatic load is and then go to examples. If you have housing insecurity, there's often food insecurity, which increases stress in relationships. Segregation, neighborhoods vary where they're in terms of their safety and their access to food and transportation, which increases stress. The kind of food you can get, the environment that you're in, is it around a lot of pollutants in the air, in the water, in the soil? What resources are available for schools? And if you aren't making enough money, you are at risk of having poorer nutrition and you can't transfer wealth to the next generation. So that creates strain in a family history and system. And policing and incarceration, over-policing will increase fear and potentially parental incarceration. And then there's less investment in neighborhoods where there's lots of policing. And then media representation, negative images and narratives. And it's people of color, Muslims, Arabs, poor whites, women, transgender people. There's lots of different ways that there's negative stereotypes made that make assumptions about people that impact how they're treated, that increases stress. So let's take a moment to just do some soothing breaths. Let's do 3 soothing breaths. I'll count for us, and then we will move on. If you'd like to, you can close your eyes And if not, that's okay. Find somewhere to gaze that feels good to you. I like to put a hand on my heart and a hand on my belly, right under my rib cage, because that provides for me some soothing. And let's do an inhale and exhale. That's one. Inhale and exhale. That's two. Inhale and exhale. And if you're ready, gently open your eyes and release that practice. So our goals in healing trauma are to make choices based on tolerating and managing sensations and emotions. Because as we saw with the shark music experience, your sensations in your body affect your emotions. And when you've had a lot of trauma, it's harder to tolerate those feelings, but that's the goal. And ideally, we would be responding to what is presently in front of us about our current time and situation, our current skills and capacities, and our sense of worth, versus being back in our triggered state and back where we were in the time of a trauma. So that requires us at baseline to be in relationships and environments that support our well-being and our capacity to act for ourselves and for others that we care about. So I want to introduce this idea called the orienting response. So our orienting response helps us select what we pay attention to in all the moments. And orienting can be both conscious or involuntary. So involuntary or reflexive orienting is if you hear a loud noise and you turn because we're all wired for survival. So you want to protect yourself because that might be something dangerous. So that's like an involuntary orienting. But if you aren't being intentional about where you're paying attention, you automatically go to what's familiar or what you've been taught to notice or what to expect. And if you've had trauma, your attention is going towards threat and danger and conflict or trying to avoid that. And so that's where you have some of that sensitized response. So it's limiting your field to look for things about survival and being afraid. So I want to take a more benign example of orienting. So let's say that there's a woman named Nicole, and she grew up in a house. In terms of that circle of security map, she couldn't really go into her caregiver for affection. They weren't comfortable with feelings and affection and helping you with how you feel, but they were comfortable with her going out and being a star and being a good student, or winning at the spelling bee or whatever when she was young. And so now she's grown up, and she knows from her childhood that the only way she got connection from her mom is if she was achieving, if she was excelling. And so now she's an adult, and she works long hours to produce well at her job. And even if she has free time, her mind drifts to work and the dynamics at work or the things she needs to do to improve at work. So it's very, very like a little magnetic pull to do that. And where is that coming from? Because she wants to not experience a distress of disappointing her internal little mother and or not performing well and not being loved. So now she's grown up, and it's like she orients towards the same things, like it went from school to work. And so that is impacting her relationships and her health, because she may have a very loving family who feels neglected. She may not be going out for these hikes and these beautiful days like this that she might have been able to do. So what we talked about earlier about you can't erase the past, but you can create new associations and new ways of being. So say Nicole's in therapy, and she's telling her therapist how stressed she is at work and she can't focus because she's so anxious about doing something well. So the therapist says to her, why don't you go for a 20-minute walk? It's a beautiful day. So Nicole says, but I have things to do. She goes, well, why don't you just do an experiment? Just try it and see if you feel different when you come back in 20 minutes. What's 20 minutes? So she listens and she goes outside and it's like, oh, it's gorgeous outside. The sun is dappling on the leaves and on the pond, and she can see egrets flying around, and she feels less stressed. And she's enjoyed life a little bit more, calmed down her system a little bit more. So she was intentional in orienting to something different. So our orienting habits affect how we feel. So current experiences that remind us of the past that were maybe not such good experiences stimulate the parts of the brain and body that drive actions that were suited to what was happening in the past. So we want to support a reorganization of the brain by consciously inhibiting those old habits and putting our attention towards something new. So one way of doing that is through mindfulness, and more specifically, directed mindfulness. So mindfulness is paying attention to what's happening inside and outside of you in the present moment. And pausing brings you back to what is actually happening and what you're feeling in your body. And ideally, you're doing this with some sense of friendliness and not being hard on yourself. And you have this capacity anytime and anywhere. It's quite a power, actually. So what's an example of non-directed mindfulness? I feel anxious and I ask myself, what am I noticing in my body right now? It's not so directed. But if I say, I feel anxious in my body, what happens if I bring my full attention to just the feeling of my feet on the ground? There's going to probably be a shift in that anxiety. Or if I feel anxious, but I bring my attention to this photo on my desk of my family all smiling and my son hugging me, it's going to shift things just a tad. And that's how it happens. You do a little tads and they add up. So another important part of, I feel, healing from trauma and having more resiliency is self-compassion. And what does that mean? It's a way to hold yourself with loving, connected presence, to turn toward your pain with compassion directed inward. It's choosing to react to difficulties in life by calming and comforting yourself with kindness rather than criticizing yourself and having maybe perfectionistic standards. So I'm very familiar with this because I'm very perfectionistic. So it's very hard for me to always do self-compassion, but I've been working at it over the years. And it allows you to, again, have agency to build a secure attachment with yourself because you're doing this in your own mind. So what is the physiology of self-compassion? It's soothing our pain. It's activating our mammalian caregiving system because we're mammals. And it's increasing oxytocin levels, which is kind of like the love hormone. Oxytocin makes you feel more trust. It makes you feel calmer, safer, more generous, connected with others. And it's released during soothing, tender touch. That's why, like when I say, I like to put a hand on my heart, a hand on my belly, right away, I'm giving my system a little tip in the direction of more regulation and more resiliency, because I'm doing something to support oxytocin being released, because I'm not doing it aggressively, I'm doing it with warmth and care. That being said, if you have not had the most kind childhood, you may experience something called backdraft. And backdraft in firefighting terms is a chemical reaction that occurs when oxygen is reintroduced to a fire when there's been little ventilation. So if there's a burning room and you open the door and oxygen comes in, that results in a rapid combustion. So backdraft is the pain that may arise when we give ourselves kindness and compassion, because your system is going, oh no, this isn't what's supposed to happen. So it's a sign that you're on your way. It's a good sign that you're on your way to healing. And how do you know? It's like you may feel grief or shame or sadness, or you might like, oh no, here I go again with all this stuff. Or you might have more somatic concerns depending on who you are. So what do you do about this? Well, you can realize, oh, there's the backdraft, or there's my grief, or there's my perfectionism, whatever the thing is for you. And where is it in your body? And redirect your attention to something outside of your body and do things that orient you to pleasure. Tea, walk, listen to music, watch a movie. So what does the research say about self-compassion? If you have more self-compassion, your self-criticism goes down, your rumination goes down, your stress hormones go down, and your perfectionism goes down. And what increases? Your capacity to regulate unpleasant emotions, capacity to experience pleasant emotions, persistence when failing at tasks increases. You're accountable for your mistakes more easily. You can cope with chronic pain better, and you have empathic concern for others suffering, and you have more forgiveness. So I talked about us saying we were talking about resilience today. So what am I saying resilience is? It's the ability to shift ourselves physiologically and psychologically to a window of tolerance of sensation and emotion, so that we are feeling more warmth, more sense of openness, more of a sense of a boundary. There's aliveness in our chest and our belly. We're connected with others. We're taking action for ourselves and others, and there's a sense of hope. And what's going to promote that? From the beginning of this talk today, our connection to others, how we're loved and are being loved, that's fundamentally true for our entire lifespan. And if you can touch into people with the things that upset you and get reflections of your value and get compassion or get hugs, all of that is going to give you energy and it's going to decrease your stress. Nature is very important. You know, nature, assuming it's not storms, but nature, like it's like a day like today, you know, a beautiful day, or even a rainy day if you like rain. But being connected to nature or having animals or even connected to the land, all of these things can just make you feel good and bring a sense of well-being to your body. And spirituality, a sense of something greater, often can feel comforting. And creation, art, music, dance, all of these things are ways that we can be with each other, we can be alone, either way, and it brings connection, but it's also what's often a part of how a culture kind of identifies itself. In addition to food and beliefs, it's your art, it's your music, it's your dance, your creativity, and doing things together feels good. You know, we need each other. We're very social creatures. And if you're doing something in a way that feels like you've made a difference, it's gratifying. It makes you have energy for life. And doing things that bring you joy or fulfillment, whatever your hobbies are, and play, you know, playing with your kids or your pets, or even with your other friends, you know, depending on what you like to play. Like some people like pickleball, for example. But whatever it is that you enjoy, these are things that promote resilience. And I think cultures have a lot of these things built in. And they can help with all of the stressors that do occur in our society and just in day-to-day life. So I wanted to share a little bit about my culture. My dad is now deceased, but he played the accordion and the saxophone all my life. I'm from the US Virgin Islands, from St. Thomas, and I'm from a local white community that's of French descent. And they came, at least my family came to the Virgin Islands in the 1800s. And the French men often played accordion. So that was a common thing to have in a house, even though like they were very poor people, but somehow someone managed to have an accordion. And when my dad was a young boy, times were very hard, and all the men in the community had gone to the States in order to work in factories and cities and send home money. And my dad was left behind as kind of like the only male person, but he was only like 8 or 9. And someone had left an accordion, and that was culturally like a commonality in houses to have had an accordion at that time. So my dad thankfully had a musical capacity, and I don't have that myself, but he could do this accordion. And I don't know if you've ever seen an accordion, but you're going up and down and left to right at the same time. And if you're doing it with a band, you're doing it in doing all of that in combination with other people. It's really quite remarkable. And so to illustrate resiliency and culture, so this was my dad. He did this at like 8 or 9 years old, and he died about 2 years ago at 80. So for 70 years, he played the accordion. And men today in my culture don't play the accordion anymore. But he continued to play, and he played in bands. He played the saxophone. And they always asked for him to even sit in with other bands because it was like a skill. But here in the picture on the left, his brother is playing like this gourd, and the other men are family friends. And my dad at this point has bone cancer, and he has dementia. And so even though he didn't have his faculties and his body was deteriorating, he was, you know, he couldn't remember a lot of things. He could remember the music of his childhood, the old songs. And so the connectedness of my family and the people in the community, his brother played the gourd, and the other guys played the little guitars, and they brought a chair for him down to the beach so he could be comfortable. And they all were able to play, and he could still be a part of things and be supported, even though he was quite sick. So he also went to a party, and you can't see his face, but I'm going to play a clip. It's a minute long, and it's of him playing the accordion, but in this case, it's hooked up to like someone has a microphone and stuff, but it's a taste of the culture where I'm from and what people might want to play at a party. So now I turn the question to you. How does your culture sustain you? Thanks, Janice. Thanks, Sue. The memories, growing up multicultural. Celebrations with storytelling. Thanks, Michael. Gatherings with food, music, and dance. Music, food, and laughs. So community, food, music, it makes you feel connected, right? Like during the pandemic, I was in touch with people at home through Facebook, and people were so frustrated because it's a dancing culture. So like the events are the kinds of things people do to party and hang out. And they're like, I just want to dance because they have to be home and they couldn't go out. Family reunions. The memories of good times will never go away. I love the video. My father was passionate about music with the piano. Yeah. So these are things like you can orient, like we're talking about orienting, you can orient yourself to those good feelings, because I have to say, even when I was looking to put the video into the presentation, I had a lot of mixed feelings seeing the pictures of my father being so declined. But then I was like, he's triumphant, you know? He was there playing and enjoying and being a part, making the party good. So it's possible to use the wealth of a culture to support your resiliency. So to summarize, a secure attachment is a protective factor in supporting social competence and emotional regulation and stress response systems. Our historical and current environmental and cultural context influences our relationships and the experience of stress and resilience. If we intentionally orient to things that provide us with calm or joy, and we direct mindfulness in a way away from our distress at times to re-regulate and offer self-compassion, these are tools within our disposal to build resilience. And connecting to others, to nature, the land, art, dance, spirituality, and music all promote resilience. So I want to close us out with a loving kindness meditation. Speaking of loving kindness and compassion, and then I'll open up to any questions or comments people have. So I want to credit the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, whose work I'm drawing upon, and the poem I'm going to offer is by David White, and it's called Twice Blessed. So that I stopped there and looked into the waters, seeing not only my reflected face, but the great sky that framed my lonely figure. And after a moment, I lifted my eyes and then my hands, I lifted my hands and then my eyes, and I allowed myself to be astonished by the great everywhere calling to me, like an old and unspoken invitation, made new by the sun and the spring and the cloud and the light, like something both calling to me and radiating from where I stood, as if I could understand everything I had been given and everything ever taken from me. As if I could be everything I have ever learned and everything I could ever know. As if I knew both the way I had come and secretly the way underneath I was still promised to go, brought together like this with the unyielding ground and the symmetry of the moving sky caught in still waters. Someone I have been and someone I am just about to become, something I am and will be forever, the shared generosity of being loved through loving, the miracle reflection of a twice blessed life. So let's continue to turn our attention inward. And I invite you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable to do so. If you prefer, find somewhere to gaze that's not distracting. I encourage gentle touch, that oxytocin boost. A hand on my heart and hand on my belly just under my rib cage works for me. Whatever works for you. For now, we're just here being with ourselves, taking a moment to pause, allowing ourselves to feel as we feel and be as we are. Just notice the sensations of your feet touching the floor, what it feels like to be supported by your chair, how your back feels, your hips. Just let your body settle downward into a more spacious presence. I'm going to offer some loving kindness affirmations that I would like you to repeat in your mind with the intention to be kind to yourself. May I be safe from inner and outer harm. May I be compassionate of heart. May I have clarity of mind. May I be flexible, open, and kind. May I live with ease. We would all benefit from affection and kindness, so let's offer these affirmations to each other. May we be safe from inner and outer harm. May we be compassionate of heart. May we have clarity of mind. May we be flexible, open, and kind. May we live with ease. Let's close with 3 deep breaths. I invite you to offer yourself greater soothing by doing longer exhales. I will count for us. Inhale and exhale. That's 1. Inhale and exhale. That's 2. Inhale and exhale. When you're ready, gently open your eyes and release this practice. We have about, I don't know, 6 or 7 minutes left. Is there anything anyone wants to talk about, ask, share? There's a lot of different material covered. Thanks.
I think I speak for everybody here to thank you so much, Roxanne, for sharing that information with us. They're definitely insightful and definitely I feel like I hope expanded everybody's understanding about trauma and what it means to be resilient. Remember, as I said before, we are going to be sending the slides as well as the recording out after this. So please help us out by completing the evaluation to let us know how much you enjoyed this, as so we can also continue to bring quality trainings to you through Family Justice Institute. So thank you. Does anybody else last call and have any questions and comments?
Hi, good morning. My name is Andrea. I don't know if you can hear me.
Okay, I can hear you now. We can hear you.
Okay.
Hear your volume
Perfect.
up some.
Okay. Let me see. I have my my headphones connected. Roxanne, first of all, that was such an amazing presentation. I feel so calm and at ease, and I definitely got emotional you sharing, you know, the videos and the pictures of your father.
Thanks.
So I thank you for sharing that. I was curious about the fight, flight, freeze response. Recently I started hearing about the fawn response. I don't know if you've heard of this response. Or so I was just curious if you had any thoughts about
I have heard of it, and I decided to keep it simple for fight, flight, freeze for today, but
yes.
there are other variations that there's appease, flock, dissociating, you know, there's a lot of different, there's more complexity. And it matters what your relationships and the environment you're in are kind of lending towards what you need to do to survive. And so appeasing or fawning might be what is needed, which is essentially being more submissive
Mhm.
in order to be safe.
Yeah.
So yes, there's,
Okay. Thank you
and
so
flocking
much.
is like gathering with others to not be alone
Mhm.
with stress.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your thoughts. Appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments? Thanks for your time. Well, thank you everyone for coming today. I know that there's lots of things that pull us in many directions, and I appreciate your attendance, and I wish you well.